January 30th, 1999. The day before Super Bowl 33, the NFL held its annual awards ceremony, and one of the league's most prestigious honors was the Bart Starr Award, given to the player who best exemplifies character, leadership, and integrity. And the winner that year was Falcons safety Eugene Robinson, a respected veteran and team leader with a high character reputation. So the NFL handed him the award and publicly celebrated him as one of the finest representatives of the league. But just a few hours later, he was arrested. According to police, Robinson approached a woman in Miami and offered money but the woman turned out to be an undercover officer. And somehow the story wasn't over, because less than 24 hours later, Robinson still had to play in the Super Bowl. Running on almost no sleep and carrying one of the biggest public embarrassments imaginable, Robinson endured one of the roughest games of his career. Early in the game, Broncos receiver Rod Smith got behind him for an 80-yard TD. Later, Robinson missed a tackle on Terrell Davis that helped set up another Denver score. The Broncos went on to win 34-19. Before Robin Williams was one of the biggest comedians on the planet, he actually made history as an NFL cheerleader. On November 11, 1979, the Broncos were hosting the Patriots when fans noticed something very unusual on the sidelines. One of the Broncos cheerleaders was Mork from Ork. The stunt was organized as a cross-promotion because Mork and Mindy was one of the biggest TV shows in America at the time. Williams had become an overnight superstar, and on this day became the first male cheerleader in NFL history. Civilization would collapse if a kicker won MVP today. But in 1982, this happened during one of the strangest years in league history. The 1982 NFL season was shortened by a players' strike, meaning teams only played 9 games total, which opened the door for something completely insane. Mark Mosley became the most reliable scorer in football. He made 20 of his 21 attempts for the Redskins, won MVP over Dan Fouts, and helped carry Washington to the best record in the NFC. The 2010 San Diego Chargers are the most statistically bizarre team in NFL history. In terms of yardage, they had both the #1 offense and defense, but still managed to miss the playoffs, which sounds mathematically impossible, but they went 9-7 with guys like Phillip Rivers, Antonio Gates, and Darren Sproles because their special teams unit was pathetic. If I asked you to guess who holds the record for most receiving yards over a 4-game stretch, you might throw out names like Jerry Rice, Calvin Johnson, or Antonio Brown. But in 2013, a Browns wide receiver had 774 yards in 4 games. That's nearly 200 yards per game for an entire month. In back-to-back weeks, Josh Gordon had consecutive 200-yard receiving games, which nobody else has ever done in the NFL. And his quarterbacks during this season included Brandon Weeden, Brian Hoyer, and Jason Campbell. He led the NFL in receiving yards despite being suspended for the first 2 games of the year, which is why Gordon became one of the biggest what-if stories in NFL history. Talent-wise, he genuinely looked like one of the most unstoppable receivers of all time. Daunte Culpepper was one of the most physically ridiculous QBs ever. He had the build and athleticism of a defensive end and threw absolute missiles. In 2004 with the Vikings, he threw for nearly 4,800 yards, accounted for 41 total touchdowns, and finished number 2 in MVP voting, launching bombs to Randy Moss. But Culpepper had a serious fumble problem. In fact, over the course of his career, he recorded 102 fumbles, which exceeds the number of starts he made in his career, 100. Makes sense considering he was a 260-pound quarterback trying to bulldoze linebackers while holding the football with one hand like a loaf of bread. So with incredible highlights came some absolutely disaster moments. Yet he still spent 5 years as one of the best QBs in the game. Brett Favre's NFL career started in the most Brett Favre way imaginable. When he entered the league in '91 with the Falcons, he was a reckless maniac, which became obvious the second he stepped onto the field. Favre attempted only 4 passes as a rookie in '91, and the first 2 that did not hit the ground were both interceptions, one of which was a pick-6 thrown to the Redskins defense. So after year 1, Brett Favre had completed more passes to opposing defenses than his own teammates. He didn't complete his first pass to an offensive player until 1992 after being traded to the Packers. Except his first completion as a Packer was not to a teammate either. During a game against the Buccaneers, Favre threw a pass that was deflected by a Bucs pass rusher and bounced right back to him. Brett Favre's attempt complete to Brett Favre. Bo Jackson is the most mythical athlete in NFL history, but there's an active NFL head coach most known for wearing khakis who actually outrushed him. Jackson's NFL career was short because of the hip injury he suffered in the 1990 playoffs. He only played parts of 4 NFL seasons before his body betrayed him, while Jim Harbaugh slowly piled up over 2,700 rushing yards during his career because he played for 14 years and scrambled constantly throughout the 80s and 90s. Sam Darnold has had one of the more interesting career arcs of the past 10 years, but his family backstory is even stranger. There was an iconic cigarette-smoking cowboy who became one of the most recognizable advertising symbols in American history. For decades, the Marlboro Man was the image of rugged American masculinity. Cowboy hat, open plain, cigarette hanging from his mouth. If you grew up in the second half of the 20th century, you knew exactly who he was. And one of the men who portrayed the Marlboro Man was Sam Darnold's maternal grandfather, who tragically died of lung cancer at 69 years old. Wes Welker might be the unluckiest great wide receiver in NFL history, because he spent 6 seasons catching passes from Tom Brady, then 2 more with Peyton Manning, and never won it all. Statistically speaking, a player spending 6 years with Tom Brady had about a 90% chance of winning at least 1 ring. Welker landed in the unfortunate 10%. In 1943, World War II was draining football talent across the entire country. Tons of NFL players had left to serve in the military, rosters were falling apart, and some teams genuinely were not sure if they could field enough players to function. So 2 rival franchises in the Steelers and Eagles had to merge together to survive, and the Steagles were actually decent, finishing 5-4-1. But the following year, the Steelers merged with the Cardinals instead to become Card Pit. They were eventually nicknamed the Carpets because they went 0-10 and everybody walked all over them. Between 2017 and 2020, not a single one of the number 1 overall picks could win a game before tying one. Myles Garrett started his career 0-17-1 and Baker Mayfield 0-1-1 before they finally notched their first win together on the Browns in early 2018. In 2019, Kyler Murray tied the Lions in his first game. And finally, Joe Burrow and the Bengals tied the Eagles in Week 3 of 2020, meaning Burrow started his career 0-2-1 before getting his first win. In 2014, the Chiefs went an entire NFL season without a single touchdown pass to a wide receiver. All 18 of Alex Smith's touchdowns went to a running back or tight end. Jamal Charles and Travis Kelce led the team with 5 each. Kansas City still went 9-7. In the 2018 NFL Draft, the Bills selected quarterback Josh Allen with the 7th overall pick. Then in the 2019 Draft, the Jaguars selected linebacker Josh Allen, also with the 7th overall pick. Drafting Josh Allen 7th overall has worked 100% of the time. Larry Fitzgerald's hands were so absurdly reliable that over his entire career, he recorded more tackles than drops. Fitzgerald played 17 NFL seasons, caught over 1,400 passes, and only dropped the ball 29 times, compared to 41 tackles, due in large part to subpar quarterback play for most of his career. The Chicago Bears were founded in 1920. The New York Jets were founded in 1959. Combined, those 2 franchises have existed for 173 years and have produced a grand total of 1 4,000-yard passing season. Joe Namath in 1967 threw for 4,007 yards. In just the last 2 seasons, quarterbacks have hit 4,000 yards 12 different times. Meanwhile, the Bears and Jets are pushing a combined 2 centuries with 1. Randall Cunningham is a pioneer at the quarterback position because of his rocket arm and speed. But one of the most amazing stats of his career has absolutely nothing to do with throwing or running. At UNLV, he actually played quarterback and punter because he had such an amazing athletic skill set. And with the Eagles, Philly decided to put that big boot to use. In 1989, he uncorked a 91-yard punt against the Bills, which is the 3rd longest punt in NFL history. He also had an 80-plus yard punt in 1994, making him the only player ever to hit both milestones. In 2006, LaDainian Tomlinson had one of the most dominant seasons ever at any position. He scored 31 touchdowns himself and even threw 2 touchdowns en route to the MVP. Just with his rushing and receiving touchdowns, he scored 186 points. The Raiders' entire team scored only 168 total points all year. One running back outscored an NFL roster over a full season. Oakland went 2-14 in 2006 and scored only 12 offensive touchdowns all year. Jerry Rice is of course the all-time leader in receiving yards after turning 40 years old, with 2,509. But Tom Brady is number 2. He has 6 receiving yards after age 40, thanks to a pass he caught from Julian Edelman against the Titans in the fourth quarter of Week 10 in 2018. Most people subconsciously think of the Cardinals as one of those newer-looking expansion teams, like the Texans, Panthers, or Jaguars. But they're actually older than the state of Arizona. The Cardinals franchise was founded in 1898 in Chicago as the Morgan Athletic Club. Arizona didn't officially become a state until 1912. The Cards are ancient. In 1940, the Chicago Bears played the Redskins for the league title. Washington actually entered the game feeling confident. Just 3 weeks earlier, they beat Chicago 7-3, and owner George Preston Marshall spent the week publicly trash-talking the Bears and mocking Chicago quarterback Sid Luckman, which looked pretty silly when Chicago scored 28 points in the second quarter alone, and looked even worse when the final score read 73-0. The most lopsided game in NFL history was a championship game. Tom Brady played only 3 seasons for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but that was enough for him to nearly rewrite the entire franchise record book. After joining the Bucs at the age of 43, Brady finished his Tampa Bay tenure with the 3rd most passing yards in franchise history, and he was less than 200 yards away from second place. He also retired with the 2nd most passing touchdowns in franchise history, which says 2 things. Tom Brady was absurdly productive, 14,643 yards and 106 touchdowns in just a few years, but also that the Bucs have suffered through a truly unbelievable amount of quarterback turnover since their 1976 inception. Bill Belichick is famous for rewarding players who do the little things. Bathroom discipline is apparently one of those things, because former Patriots linebacker Larry Izzo once revealed that Belichick gave him a game ball for pooping on the sideline without anyone noticing. According to Izzo, he realized he had a serious emergency situation developing mid-game, so he made the decision to sneak behind the sideline, handle it as discreetly as possible, and return to the game without causing a scene. Belichick found out what happened and rewarded Izzo with a game ball for demonstrating elite professionalism and preventing the situation from becoming a distraction. NFL ties are one of the weirdest things in sports. After 3.5 grueling hours, guess who wins? Nobody. Every franchise has experienced that feeling at least once, except the Jaguars through 501 regular season games since 1995. The Jets and Eagles first played each other in 1973, when Philly took a 24-23 win at home. And for decades, no matter the era, no matter the quarterback, no matter how good or bad either team was, it was the Eagles coming out on top in every matchup. They even won a Super Bowl before the Jets could beat them one time. Finally, in 2023, the Jets beat the Eagles 20-14 for their first win in 13 tries, which means the Texans are now the only team that has not beaten every NFL franchise at least once. In 2010, while still playing quarterback for the Vikings, Brett Favre became a grandfather at 40 years old, which made him widely recognized as the first active player in history to become a grandfather while still on an NFL roster. When Favre entered the NFL in 1991, George H.W. Bush was president, the Cowboys dynasty hadn't even happened yet, and the first website had just been created. Nearly 20 years later, he suited up on an NFL field while becoming somebody's grandpa. And he was still good. The year prior, in 2009, Favre threw 33 touchdowns and took the Vikings to the NFC Championship. The Green Bay Packers and Cleveland Browns have both existed since the first half of the 20th century, but when it comes to quarterback stability, they're worlds apart. Since 1950, the Packers have started only 35 quarterbacks in over 75 years. Meanwhile, the Browns have started 42 since 1999 alone. The reason this stat exists can largely be summarized with 3 names: Bart Starr, Brett Favre, and Aaron Rodgers. The Packers have gone from one Hall of Fame QB directly to another for decades at a time. Steve Young started 143 regular season games, won 2 MVPs, made the Hall of Fame, threw for over 33,000 yards, and never took a single snap out of the shotgun in his entire career. Which is unexpected because Young, who was super creative and dangerous outside the pocket, is the type of player who could have been living in shotgun formations. But the NFL was different back then. Quarterbacks still lined up directly under center almost every play. The shotgun existed, but teams treated it more like a gimmicky, exotic passing formation rather than an offensive staple. Steve Young also threw more Super Bowl touchdowns in one game than the Broncos have across all 8 of their Super Bowl appearances. At one point, the Broncos had a very tumultuous relationship with the big game. Whenever Denver reached the biggest stage, things went horribly wrong. And one stat perfectly captures just how brutal it got. In Super Bowl 29, Steve Young threw a Super Bowl record 6 touchdown passes against the Chargers, while the Broncos have just 4 total passing touchdowns in their 8 games, which is unbelievable considering John Elway and Peyton Manning have played in 7 of them. But the early Broncos experience was riddled with humiliation against NFC powerhouses. At one point, Denver lost Super Bowls by 17, 19, 32, and 45 points. Their 3 wins have largely come via the run game and defense. Tony Dungy is remembered today as one of the most respected coaches in NFL history. Calm demeanor, defensive mastermind, and a championship-winning head coach. The embodiment of humble professionalism. But you may be shocked to learn that he is the last NFL player to throw an interception as a quarterback and catch an interception as a defender in the same game. Before Dungy became a legendary coach, he played for the Steelers during the late 1970s. Dungy played defensive back, but during a game in 1977, Pittsburgh's entire QB room went down with injury. So the Steelers turned to Tony Dungy and asked him to play QB. Earlier on defense, he had intercepted Oilers QB Dan Pastorini. He then stepped in at QB and threw 2 picks himself. The 1974 NFL Draft is one of the greatest in football history because it produced 8 future Hall of Famers, and the Steelers ended up with 5 of them. 4 through the draft, then they signed the 5th as an undrafted free agent. First-round receiver Lynn Swann turned into a Super Bowl legend. Second-round linebacker Jack Lambert became the face of the Steel Curtain defense. 4th-round receiver John Stallworth was one of the 70s best deep threats. 5th-rounder Mike Webster is one of the greatest centers ever. And then undrafted Donnie Shell became one of the most underrated safeties of all time. These guys became foundational pieces of one of the greatest dynasties in sports history. The 2002 Steelers took the most dominant loss ever. Against the expansion Houston Texans, Pittsburgh recorded 24 first downs. Houston had 3. Pittsburgh outgained the Texans in total yardage, 422 to 47. Yet the Steelers lost the game 24-6 because of turnovers. They repeatedly drove into Texans territory and then coughed the ball up while allowing the Texans to score on that play. A fumble returned for a touchdown, and then 2 Aaron Glenn pick sixes was enough for the W. There are a lot of legendary names in football history. Joe Montana, Walter Payton, Lawrence Taylor, but arguably the most comical name is Dick Butkus, and the name became even more iconic because of how dominant he was. Dick Butkus is legitimately one of the greatest linebackers in football history. Hall of Famer, 8-time Pro Bowler, 5-time All-Pro, and the face of the Bears defense in the 60s. Most quarterbacks get better as time goes on. But you could say, aside from his 2015 MVP season, that Cam Newton peaked in his first 2 NFL games. In his debut, Cam threw for 422 yards against the Arizona Cardinals, which at the time was the most passing yards ever by a rookie in their debut. The next week, he threw for 432. Cam's first 2 NFL games were both 400-yard passing performances, and those ended up being the only 400 passing yard games of his entire career. Jerry Rice was drafted in 1985, which means he was drafted closer to the moon landing than to 9/11. The Apollo 11 moon landing happened in 1969. Rice entered the NFL 16 years later. Then 9/11 happened 16 years after that, when Rice was about to log 2 more 1,000-yard seasons with the Raiders at age 39 and 40. In 2002, he went for over 1,200 yards with the Raiders and helped lead them to the Super Bowl against Tampa Bay. Rice was the greatest receiver of his generation. Barry Sanders was the greatest running back. Jerry Rice ended his career with 22 times as many playoff touchdowns as Barry Sanders. The 2000 Baltimore Ravens had one of the greatest defenses in NFL history, but their offense was so bad that they once went 5 straight games without scoring an offensive touchdown. Perhaps most impressively, they didn't even lose a single one of those games by more than 8 points. The Ravens' defense that year featured the likes of Ray Lewis, Rod Woodson, and Sam Adams. They allowed only 10.3 total points per game, the second best mark ever.
At one point, they beat Cleveland 12-0 on field goals.
Then beat Dallas 27-0 while scoring as many points with defense and special teams as offense. And of course, they went on to crush the Giants in Super Bowl 35.